Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today as we partner with NI Cyber and discuss securing fintech, the first in our two-part cybersecurity webinar series. My name is Hilary Morn and I'm the Programme Manager of the Fintech Corridor. The Fintech Corridor is a cross-border cluster with a driving force in developing, collaborating, facilitating and promoting the region from Dublin to Belfast to start or expand in fintech, and as a gateway for fintech companies to Europe, whilst connecting EU and UK fintech. We have a keen focus on innovation and growth within finance and technology spaces and continue to pioneer a vision for the region, together with the opportunity to streamline and drive engagement between the north and south of the island of Ireland. We see immense opportunity to engage with companies from start-up to multinational and to ignite opportunities and collaborations across the island, which will ultimately benefit the region and its members. The Fintech Corridor has an established membership of brand ambassadors, where you can connect and engage with a range of like-minded people in related industry. We are delighted to have some of our partners and brand ambassadors at today's event. The Fintech Corridor has had many supporters over the past few months. In particular, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Intertrade Ireland for their key support to enable the corridor to develop a cross-border basis. Also, thank you to Louth County Council and State Street, who have supported our recent launch and development of the programme. I would like to introduce you to the moderator of today's event. We are very fortunate to co-brand this event with NI Cyber and to have Simon Whittaker, CEO of Vertical Structure and Chair of the Steering Committee for the NI Cyber Security Cluster. I feel honoured to be in the company of such experts and look forward to the session on securing fintech. Without further ado, I will pass you over to Simon. Simon, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your role at Vertical Structure and NI Cyber.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Hilary. That's brilliant. And yes, I also feel very privileged to be part of this group of people. My name is Simon Whittaker. I'm chair of the Northern Ireland Cybersecurity Cluster Steering Committee. I'm also CEO of cybersecurity consultancy Vertical Structure. NI Cyber is a name we've chosen for the cybersecurity cluster, which represents companies in Northern Ireland. We're a cluster of companies based here developing world-leading cybersecurity technologies for customers worldwide. We're hoping to help promote cybersecurity as an industry, as a career, and to help our members work together to achieve some brilliant things. It's great to be partnering with Hilary and her team at the Fintech Corridor here, and it's brilliant to have these very distinguished guests with us today as well. Just as a very brief introduction, and I'm going to ask them each to say a little bit about themselves very briefly. But firstly, we have Keith Lippert from Allstate. So Keith, thank you very much for joining us. We have Paddy Beagan from Vesta, and we also have Donal Kerr from Securitas. Now, unfortunately, Donal's camera isn't working today, so we don't have the pleasure of his face up on the screen today, but sure, we'll work through that each as we go. So if I can maybe start with Keith. Keith, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm Keith Lippert. I'm the Deputy CISO for Allstate. We're a Fortune 100 insurance company based predominantly in America. Before that, I ran fraud prevention for American Express in all international markets, and I was chairman of their banks in Russia, India, Mexico, and Canada. Prior to that, I spent 5 years at Barclays as their legal chief operating officer, predominantly responsible for anti-terrorism controls, sanctions, money laundering, and politically exposed person screening. And that really is the last 13 years outside of America. Before that, I did work in banking in America as a CISO for 2 US-based banks.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Keith. That's fabulous. Paddy, could I ask you to give us an introduction to yourself as well, please?
Yeah, sure. I lead so I work for a company called Vesta. So it's a US multinational headquartered in Portland, Oregon. But the European operations have been set up here for approximately 15 years. And we effectively help merchants to grow payment approvals without the fear or cost of fraud. So I'm the GM here for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We're based in Dundalk, and we have a team of about 80 across all the various functions: IT, InfoSec, call center, RA, our global knock, finance and admin, etc. And I'm kind of working in this business for about 12 years in a kind of business development role, working and partnering with large kind of tier 1 enterprise customers, to grow our business of bundled payment and fraud solutions. Previous to that, I worked in a company called Sigma Wireless, managing a range of large-scale logistics, fulfillment, and distribution projects for some major telecoms clients and the postal network. So I've kind of been in the, I suppose I've been in this kind of space for, by and large, about 20 years.
Brilliant stuff. Very good. Great deal of knowledge to bring to the table today. It's fantastic to have you on board here today. So thank you very much, Paddy. And Donal as well. Donal Kerr from Securitas. Donal, thanks very much for joining us. Just wondering if you might be able to give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer for Securitas. We're a cybersecurity monitoring and cyber defense firm based in Dublin, and we make technology to help organizations protect themselves against cyber attacks, principally focusing on infrastructure and servers. So we've customers in Northern Ireland, France, Portugal, and the various parts of the UK, and we are basically helping companies identify cyber threats and deal with them at a very early stage. So one of our investors is the French IT services and security firm iTrust, and they're using our software as part of their security operations center. So we enable enterprise to basically facilitate protection of their infrastructures. And yeah, I'm just here to learn from the panel and share anything that I can about this sort of world, and give you some examples and visibility of the sort of things we see and how you can protect yourselves and your organizations.
Wonderful. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Donal. Very much appreciated. So I thought we might start. I'm going to pick on you first, Keith, if that's okay, just around the area of insider threat. Insider threat is an area which organizations must pay close attention to. And how do you achieve the balance in your firm between placing the required trust in your team, which allow them to do their jobs properly, and protecting the organization?
You said it in your opening there. It is about balance. And I worked for this really clever attorney at Barclays who told me one time something that stuck with me. He said, governance is the backbone of an organization. Too much and you can't move, and too little and you collapse. And I sort of think that that's sort of how I think about least privilege. We want people to have everything they need to do their job, no more and no less. And as you might expect, that's not a single solution topic. You've got to understand who needs privilege, vault those accounts appropriately, using full session recording and all of the tools you might see in the industry to manage privileged access management. I like to see a process where when you change jobs, it's like a rebirth of your privilege. So you lose everything you had and you re-up. And for a company like ours, where we see long tenure, that's really important. When I meet people at Allstate, it's many times 15 and 20 years of service. So having a job transfer process where you take away all of the old privilege and reestablish rights, I think is important. And then we do use a re-verification process where you've got to re-up and your boss or your supervisor re-verifies. But to prevent that from being a bit of a rubber stamping exercise, I pepper in randomly revoke this access privileges. And it's almost like a phishing test where we test to make sure that people are really looking at those privileges, and I report back to leadership on how many folks caught those peppered in fake entitlements. The last thing I'd say is that you have to sort of face the reality. If you're a CISO and on any given day between 80 and 100,000 people touch our network, employees, contractors, and third parties, I've never been to a town of 80 to 100,000 people didn't have some kind of criminal activity. So we have to have tools to detect various degrees of ethics. So I think you have to face the reality that you do have an insider threat. People will come to you with various forms of ethics, and you've got to have the tools to detect and prevent.
That's absolutely brilliant. I love the analogy with the backbone there as well, Keith. I think that's a really, really interesting one. You know, when we're working with clients, one of the things that we love to do is to try to help them to make everything their own, as opposed to us, or in this case you, going in and pushing something down and just saying do it this way. You know, I imagine there must be some kind of requirement to listen back to what your users are doing and what they're finding difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly in the development community, you know, we want them to have all the creativity they need, and my boss always talks about it like a kitchen that has all the ingredients they need to cook anything they want to cook. If they want an ingredient that's not on the menu, then we've got a rubber room where it's safe to play and it's off our network, and that's a different type of solution. But you're correct, and particularly with your developers who you want to be creative and innovative.
I also like the idea of reporting back. You know, it sounds like you have a certain set of metrics or a certain set of data that you give to your superiors to help them to understand. So cybersecurity not being just this, yes, Keith takes care of that. It's actually a board problem or a board issue.
Absolutely, and we're lucky to have the direct engagement of our board, who wants to hear from various opinions. They're also key in red team attacks. So our board hires a company that attacks us, and it is a full red team exercise where they will only stop the exercise if we're about to go to law enforcement. So it's a great simulation, and we do have great learnings from those events. So we're very lucky to have a board who cares about that.
Red teaming is a fantastic thing to be doing. It can be quite terrifying to be part of at times. That's the
yes.
It
is.
Brilliant, Keith. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Paddy, I wonder if I might move on to you just for a wee second here. I wonder if you could tell us, what role does Vesta play when it comes to cybersecurity, and who are the sort of customers that you work with?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose in a nutshell, Vesta really helps large merchants to medium-sized merchants sell goods and services online, or on card not present channels, really where the customer's not front and center. And we work with merchants to try and help them maximize payment approvals, optimize things like the customer experience at checkout, without the fear and cost of fraud. So a typical customer might put up lots of barriers, use lots of rules, very manual rules like velocity and threshold checks, not accept international payment cards, which is obviously a big issue now when you have things like COVID and a lot of people are shopping online, more so. And we kind of remove those barriers and guarantee transactions against the risk of fraud based on our fraud technologies and our risk decision platform and a consortium data model. And so the kind of fraud problems are typically at a transaction level, which I kind of covered, which is the payment piece, but also at an account level. At an account level, a risk decision platform really assesses and stops in real time or less than 1 second things like invalid account openings at onboarding and account creation. So by having things like liveness checks, verification of documents in real time, that fits into part of an overall risk decision. It also supports things like unauthorized modifications and access to accounts in life to stop things like phishing attacks, account takeover, enumeration attacks, etc. Those areas. And then, as I said, at a transaction level, last year we would have guaranteed about $18 billion in digital payments globally, and that would be in every kind of vertical, which was medium to high risk you could think of. So, prepaid mobile top-up is kind of where we started out from. So your Vodafones and your BTs and lots of those digital payments from unregistered SIM cards, where you need to make an instant risk decision in real time to approve a transaction for someone who could be a tourist, it could be someone on an IVR, they could be on a web channel, they could be on any of those channels. And we're making a decision to approve more transactions than an internal fraud team might do. A very close one to that might be digital gift cards, very similar thing. You know, a digital gift card, you can monetize it very quickly by going to a store, like mobile top-ups, where you have things like international revenue share fraud, where you ring a premium rate number in another country to monetize the credit that you've applied to a phone with a stolen card or device. Digital wallets, money remittance, travel and ticketing. So any of the large retailers that are working in those spaces are you know, customers that we typically partner with, or it could be things like payment service providers or gateways that can see that their customers either have chargeback problems or have a payment approval acceptance problems, where we might be able to help. And we typically look to white label with those partners to offer those services to their merchants to help them you know, grow revenue, and also for the PSP or the provider or payments as a service platform, it helps them differentiate their offering from the competition.
That's incredible, and I presume you must see kind of trails of these attempts kind of coming in, you know, through your system. You know, you must see these. You know, I noticed the world map behind you. I mean, there must be kind of areas which in your world are marked in different colours to others, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, you know, typically Western Europe's more mature, but you know, we were having a discussion on this recently. You know, you have more card penetration in these markets, so therefore your the kind of rate of fraud is higher, but you have other controls which supplement your you know, so you have things like 3D Secure, which you can leverage as well, but not necessarily the best customer experience, but they're tools you can use. But if you look at other markets like less mature markets, or like Latin America or Africa, for example, card penetration is a lot lower, so there's great opportunity for growth, but also the systems and checks that are in place for card fraud are less advanced, so therefore you see you know, higher penetration of fraud, lower acceptance levels. So that's typically where we're seeing a lot of our growth at the moment, is actually in APAC and LATAM, and more recently in Africa.
Right, fascinating. You know, we you know, obviously we've seen the introduction and the growth of kind of, I suppose, multi-factor authentication and, you know, things like SCA and PSD, you know, as part of the PSD regulations, and it's been fascinating to see how those have been implemented by each organisation concerned, and very kind of conscious that in many cases that is pretty much a European thing. And you know, as you say, that's very much a, you know, kind of a mature way of being. And you know, the other parts of the world where you know, maybe it's slightly less mature, and you know, still just swipe a card or kind of do a remote payment just with the number. That must be an area of concern for a lot of merchants.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I said to you, they are all coming along with things like, you know, things like you're managing your data and moving towards things like, but even if you actually look at the EU and the UK, on, you know, you mentioned two-factor authentication, secure or strong customer authentication, and you know, PSD2 directives. Europe's the 31st of December this year. The UK is actually not meeting that date, or is going to extend that out until I think it's the 14th of September next year. But you know, we do expect in years to come, it's you know, the US is a bit behind in terms of it's just EMV and chip and pins only in now, but we expect in years to come it's going to be an extra tool you can use to assist with fraud prevention. But us at Vesta actually only see it as a supplementary tool. So a lot of our transactions could be at a lower value than 30, so we'll be looking for low value exemptions to not use those extra forms of authentication where possible, to reduce the number of clicks a customer needs to go through to complete a successful transaction. Yes,
those are the interesting ones. You know, sometimes lots of the lower value can be more dangerous sometimes. That's a very good point. Thank you very much, Paddy. Donal, I wonder if I might kind of move on to you. I wonder if you could give us some kind of thoughts around critical business infrastructure. You know, and thinking here about what common business infrastructure, applications and operating systems is an adversary likely to target or exploit at a financial services organization or a fintech firm. You must have seen lots of these sorts of attacks and recorded these sort of things.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we recently did a proof of concept with a data center in the Isle of Man, and that data center hosts a lot of financial companies and gaming companies. And the POC threw up really a lot of interesting information about attacks coming from the four corners of the world, from very small countries to very large countries, all attempting to penetrate infrastructure in a small place in the Isle of Man to get access to primarily to servers and business applications. So the sorts of attacks you would see would be brute force attacks, where the adversary is attempting to get the login or guess the login of a server, for instance, so that they can penetrate inside an organization. Dictionary attacks, other more technical ones like cross-site scripting. There's a whole plethora, but I would say a lot of them tend to be automated. So they are running off what are called botnets, or in very rare cases where an adversary has managed to get some initial more important information or more insider information, they may have an actual individual or a team in another country doing those sorts of attacks. But what usually happens is an automated type of a scan occurs, and it would be like in the old days when people actually robbed banks, you know, you would see the guys with tights on their head running in with a suitcase. Well, they probably didn't pick a random day of the week to do that. They probably would have done the so-called stakeout. They looked at the bank over a number of weeks to see who's coming and going, checking the doors and windows, entry and exit. And it's the same in the digital world. So your organization, whether you like it or not, is under surveillance constantly, and there are people looking for chinks in your armor, and they're looking for ways to exploit them. And it's often using automated tools that you can get on websites for free. They're often open source tools, the same tools actually that the red teamers will use to go after your organization in the wrong hands. That's why they're called black hats and white hats. They can be used for ill-gotten gains, or to pursue ill-gotten gains. So yeah, the infrastructure are definitely under attack, and I suppose maybe we'll talk about it a little bit further down the line, but we hear a lot when companies say to us, oh, we're in the cloud, we're good, we're secure. And there is a little bit of confusion around cloud security and who is actually responsible for your security in the cloud. Maybe we can discuss that further along in the conversation.
That's fantastic. Yes, and you know, I think you're absolutely right. You know, there's the stages of a data breach tend to be very familiar to those of us who work in this world, and I'm sure Keith and Paddy will you know, kind of have seen all this. There is always the reconnaissance phase. There is always the, you know, let's see what we can find, frequently with, you know, automated automated applications and just things going out there to find compromises or vulnerabilities. And then it gets a little bit more, you know, kind of from a discovery point of view. And then finally at the end, the attack comes in. You know, that's it's only at that final stage when they're confident that they have everything that they're able to get in. That's a very you know, really great point to bring out. I also just, Donal, from you mentioned in there brute force and, you know, some stuff around, you know, the SQL injection and cross-site scripting and things like that. You know, brute force, I think, is a very dangerous area because we are all terrible with passwords. You know, it must be an area that, you know, that everybody has found issues, everybody has seen compromises happen. You know, from your perspective, Donal, do you frequently see that users are being compromised because of the terrible passwords they're allowing their users to set?
Yeah, I would say that is the case, and that's why the smarter organizations would use two-factor or something like two-factor for another step, because really you're just putting all of these things are they're really just attacks on the attacker. You're just increasing the amount of time. Talk to a hacker and they'll say, I can hack anything. just give me more CPUs on my side and I'll run the dictionary attack faster, and it'll be 24 hours instead of 3 weeks, and I'll still get into your system. And really the costs of hacking are quite low, and the skill set required to hack is actually not very difficult. You could probably learn a lot of very dangerous things in a weekend course if you really wanted to, and double that with, say, a bulletin board on the dark web where you can acquire accesses. I was just looking at a Twitter account that just captures sorts of examples of exploits that are for sale in the dark web that are associated with financial firms, and it is shocking. And they're probably teenagers, a lot of these people, who have managed to use some of their, I guess, more advanced IT skills, which actually wouldn't be that advanced in the grand scheme of things, but they're able to get by the relatively rudimentary security boundaries and perimeters of many types of organizations and exploit them. And that's usually where these things end up, on the dark web for sale to other parties for Bitcoin, probably, and then they'll be used for further attacks. So it mightn't be immediately that the exploits will be put to use, but they probably will be put to use at some point. So things like two-factor, they really slow everything up. I mean, there's ways across two-factor as well, but I think Google as an organization were one of the larger tech organizations to introduce two-factor across their workforce. And I think it exponentially reduced the amount of attacks that they were experiencing, simply because it just one extra layer. And it's simple. I mean, I would say that's almost like an example of the Pareto principle. You know, you focus on the 20% and the rest of the security issues really get taken care of by this just simple thing that's a little tax on the time of the Googlers logging in every day, but especially in the era of remote working, those sorts of things are crucial. And if your organization logs into a server for your email on a URL online, you really need to look at doing something better than that. And those things are legacy at this point. You need to put a bit more tax on the attackers.
Brilliant. Fantastic, Donal. Thank you very much. Some really fantastic points there. What I'd like to do is to kind of maybe go back to Keith, if I may, and just kind of, we mentioned there about some adversaries and, you know, the way in which, you know, say Paddy's got the map of the world behind him there, to reference back to that. Keith, it can sometimes be tough to attribute attack sources and locations, you know, criminal enterprises, nation state, etc. There are a number of different companies who pull together surveys which sometimes produce differing results. From your massive level of experience, are there adversarial sources which are showing a marked increase?
I have to say, you know, I get, maybe it goes without saying, it was unusual spring and summer anywhere in the world. And I think COVID created a good bit of noise in the system. So, you know, as we were talking earlier, we see 600, 700,000 attacks an hour on our perimeter. And we, as you know, as we were talking about earlier, we know automation is used to attack us, and you name it. I guess to a certain extent, I care not so much about where it's coming from. Sometimes we can tell, absolutely. But like I said, COVID created a whole lot of noise because everyone out there who was an attacker, I think, began repackaging even old tools, trying to create new clickbait, essentially, by linking it to COVID or COVID-related news. You know, again, multi-factor is really, really effective, but can I use some new COVID-related clickbait? You're working from home. Tell me about your working from home experience, and it's not really from us. So, you know, what we saw is certainly an increase in attacks over the summer across the spectrum. What we believe to be a nation state, what we believe to be automation, what we believe to be lizard squads, all across the spectrum. But for the most part, it appeared to be predominantly a recycling of old attacks, with maybe as a category, ransomware being the one big category where we saw good increases, and many of those you've seen in the press. But that's where I think we've seen interesting changes over the summer and over work from home. The last thing I'd say is I thought it was really interesting that the Bank of England over the summer came out and said, by the way, if you're going to pay ransom, you better make sure it clears sanctions. I thought that was good to see, and you know, it took till October 6th for FinCEN and OFAC to follow that guidance and to publish something. So I think the Bank of England was really out ahead with their thinking in that area. And let's face it, people use ransomware because people pay. people, organizations pay, and it works. So adding in the sanctions element, I thought was a good deterrent and hopefully will help prevent some financial crime. But that's the big theme we saw over the summer and with COVID, is a big increase in the repackaging of new clickbait of an old tool.
And I think that's really interesting. I was reading a report actually just the other day from PwC. It's actually entitled "What's Behind the Increase in Ransomware Attacks This Year?" Because for a while there, it seemed that ransomware was on the wane, as it were, or it wasn't as successful because everyone was starting to realise after WannaCry, for instance, that everything was much better patched than it had been previously. And now we're starting to see these attacks really happen. People paying, as you so rightly say. People maybe being introduced to how to buy some cryptocurrency for the first time, and not necessarily for a good reason. I think that's really, really interesting to note that you're seeing that rise, as a prime target for attack by these organisations. So I think that's a very, very interesting point to raise. The other thing I took from your answer, it must be very difficult sometimes to filter the wheat from the chaff, or the signal from the noise, or how do you identify what is a reconnaissance effort to actually do some hardcore compromising of your systems, and what is someone just running a wee tool against your infrastructure? There must be a lot of difficulty in that.
There is, and you throw bodies at it, unfortunately, bodies, technology, and money. And, we have a valuable asset in our customer data, and it's a big data set. And when you think about the things that your insurance company knows about you, it's a good data set that we have to protect. So we have a full 24/7 SOC. We have our own ability in-house to do malware dissection. We do many types of simulations, including, as I said earlier, the full red team attacks. We have our own internal red team. We really do try to take every effort we can, both technology, people, and I think recently our Security Operations Center competed in a competition against the FBI and won. So we really do try to do our best to make it difficult, I guess, as you'd say.
Yeah. And from a personal perspective, for anyone who's watching, I know that Keith and his team at Allstate, they regularly sponsor events for young people to become involved in cybersecurity, regularly are part of various community efforts to drive cybersecurity in the UK, in Northern Ireland, in the Republic, and everywhere where they
So I think we can't hear you, Simon.
We've lost your audio, Simon. I hear you, Paddy.
I hear you. Oh, hello there. Apologies. I think my microphone dropped off there, so apologies for that. But anyway, yes, just thank you to Keith and his team for the work that they're doing around bringing young people into cyber. Paddy, I wonder if I might nip onto you now. We've just discussed there that there are always these attempts that people are making to access and to compromise people's data. Data breaches are obviously a major concern in our world, in the cyber world, in the fintech world, and in the financial services sector as a whole. Ireland ranked second in Europe last year in terms of reported breaches. If we look into the UK, with the Information Commissioner's Office recently fining Ticketmaster, British Airways, Marriott, all three of which have been investigated thoroughly over the course of the last 18 months or so. Where does Vesta sit in terms of that flow of data, and how does it, kind of talk about the protecting that and maintaining compliance to help avoid organisations becoming one of those numbers?
Yeah, so typically, as I said, we provide a bundled service where we kind of act as a buffer between the the client or the customer or the enterprise customer and their customers in terms of the data we capture. And typically it's a limited set of data which is related to PCI card payment data, so PAN data, expiry information. We capture CVV, but obviously don't store CVV. And we're certified against, version, I think it's 3.2 of PCI DSS as both a merchant and a service provider. And that kind of ensures that all our card data is secured to the highest levels of encryption, in transit and at rest, use of firewalls, all the various controls, and we get audited each year by an independent QSA, and we provide that certification on to our customers. What that means in reality is for a customer of ours, typically they don't want to have their environment capture kind of PCI sensitive data. So the cardholder name and address as part of the the PAN and the other data that would allow you to steal a card information and use it elsewhere or sell it on the black market. So we typically kind of provide hosted iframe solutions, an IVR channel so someone can ring and provide their card information in a hosted IVR, which isn't part of the the infrastructure of our customer. And even if one of their calls, like for example, a call center on their side is speaking to a customer as part of a sales flow, they may conference in Vesta's IVR, but we use things like DTMF clamping, so they can't hear the tones that are being used for when the card is being captured, and then Vesta would typically provide a tokenized API back to use, so the actual card itself is never through the environment of the partner, and that effectively then means that that data isn't exposed to the to our customer itself. So they have a level of security knowing that's maintained by a company that's trusted in this area and is audited every year. In terms of other PII data, we also we anonymize the data, we nibble it, and we purge it in line with all GDPR kind of regulations. So it's only stored for as long as it needs to be stored. In some cases, it needs to be stored longer for revenue commissioners, for an audit trail, for transaction information. But other information, we we comply with all the regulations, and that helps our partners reduce OPEX and CAPEX, and also the fear of damage to their brand and reputation. And that's typically how we play a role in that space. You did mention Ticketmaster in that conversation, so I know that's quite topical at the moment. It's only I think it was last week. So in that particular case, I think it was something like 9.5 million European customers. Card data was accessed potentially, and 1.5 million users in the UK. And that particular one was the use of a third-party chatbot from a company called Vesta Technologies. But the issue there was actually just one, from what I read anyway, it was just one line of code in a kind of JavaScript library, but it was actually modified by the chatbot application was actually a customer support product, and it was modified by Ticketmaster without any kind of discussions of the implications of doing so with the third-party provider, and that's where they were actually capturing card data through the chatbot app, which wasn't the purpose of the app in the first place, and that led to a lot of the issues. Though how it was handled, go into that if you want, but how it was handled by Ticketmaster thereafter was, a pretty good example of how not to handle something.
Yes, there was a significant lag from what I between kind of being notified about a problem and then moving on. So it was really interesting to hear about that.
It was I think it was 9 months from they were first notified. So I believe they were notified by MasterCard, Visa, Barclays, Monzo, and then by the time they got to the end where they actually resolved the issue and monitored the traffic that was coming through the application, it was 9 months, and they were fined, I think it was $1.5 million, and that was for failing to assess the risk of the chatbot on the actual payment page itself, identifying and implementing sufficient security measures for that. And then the third one which was rectifying in a timely manner. So there was, I believe, there was 60,000 cards from Barclays that had to be reissued, and 6,000 from Monzo.
Yeah, it's a definitely one to watch. I don't think we've seen the last of it yet, to be honest with you, but definitely one to watch. And thank you, Paddy. That's really, really interesting stuff. And we move on to just onto Donal there. Donal, you mentioned it before, but we're hearing about these breaches and all these ways in which we're having to protect against all of these potential compromises. Obviously, one of the ways in which we can secure ourselves is all we have to do is move to the cloud, isn't it right? We just put it up in this magic cloud environment, and it's wonderfully secure instantly. Would you agree with that?
Oh, of course, yes. Amazon and Google, they just take care of your security, and you don't really have to worry about anything else. Well, it'd be great if that was the case, but there are lots of reasons why they don't do that and do not want to do that. Legal reasons to start with, but they are not in the business and looking into their tenants' technology and applications and making sure that it's secure. And that's a really fundamental point that a lot of companies don't get. I suppose the analogy I would use when I'm explaining this to people is, imagine you buy an apartment in an apartment block and there is a management company. They probably secure the apartment block in a general sense, as in they secure the parking gate and the front door, but they're not going to go around and check your apartment to see that you have locked your doors and windows. And they are not responsible if your car is stolen or if someone breaks into your apartment. So it's a very simple analogy, but that would be very similar to how it is in the cloud. So the central document that would be worth a look if you're interested in this is called the shared responsibility model, and that is a legal and technical document which most of the cloud providers, Google Cloud, AWS, etc., have a version of that, and they describe what they do and what their customers are supposed to do. And it's eye-opening to see that in most cases, a lot of the responsibility still rests on the customer side in terms of monitoring their applications and being responsible and being the data controller essentially of their data and their applications. And that just seems to get lost in translation, perhaps through marketing or through the sales pitch. But a lot of companies, including some that we have just been discussing, would have had data in the cloud, and that was probably left exposed by developers, right, who opened or left probably some sort of bucket environment with a lot of credentials in it that wasn't secure. And that definitely is not you can't hold the data center or the cloud environment responsible for something like that. It's not something they have any awareness of. And this is a problem that will run and run and run, I would say, and it's in the news every week as far as I can see, from big companies to large companies. It's a fundamental central point, but cloud security is a shared responsibility, and that's something everyone needs to consider, and it should be acknowledged at a governance level within an organization.
Absolutely right. I think that's such an important point to put across. There are people like Paddy and Keith who are taking care of in some cases vast infrastructure. I'm sure that Allstate still have a couple of data centers around somewhere to help manage things. And in those cases, they manage the physical security and those sort of those things, making sure there's a person on the reception and biometric security and all of that sort of stuff. What we get from cloud infrastructure is we have to worry less about that. That becomes a responsibility of somebody else. But if we mess things up in our implementation, then that's still our fault. That's still up to us to get right. And I think that's really difficult sometimes for people to kind of to get in there, get through their minds. Donal, thank you very much. What I'd like to just kind of go around the houses one more time, and I'm going to ask you all to look in the crystal balls sort of attached to the tables just in front of you that we had shipped over. Keith, firstly, if I may, we've spoken in the past about how you and the team at Allstate constantly strive to stay innovative within your industry. We're talking today with some organizations who are taking part in this webinar, who are at the heart of innovation in both the fintech and the cyber world. Looking into your crystal ball, what areas do you expect to see new and fascinating things happen over the next couple of years?
Well, my boss recently gave me the kiss of death. He gave me a responsibility for identity and access management. And when you look at the Verizon report on breaches, I think what they say, like 70% of breaches have some element of identity and access management failings at its heart. So naturally, I've become more interested in the topic. And in particular, the use of user behavioral analytics tools. I think that particularly with a larger remote or hybrid workforce, user behavioral analytics and the deep learning that can come from that, I think will be a part of our future going forward. And I sort of think of it like the origin of species. If I feed the UBA tool kingdom level data, I'm going to get kingdom level answers. If I give it genus and species level granular data, I'm going to get better answers and better anomaly detection. So I think identity and access management and how we're going to do that in a hybrid or work from home environment is certainly a place where I think we'll see interesting tools coming. If I was running a startup, I think there's a gap in the marketplace right now for tools for managing a remote workforce. They seem to be either deeply invasive with camera on all the time and keyboard tracking and things like that, or not as good. And the ability to tune that tool to your own culture and work environment, I think is a place where the market probably needs additional tooling. So from a security perspective, those are the things I'm interested in. In our business, it's telematics, which is a really interesting technology. We used to take a look at your age, your location, and your gender to determine whether or not we thought you'd be a good driver. And then we threw in the 1970s and 80s credit score. But turns out the best predictor of whether or not you're going to be a good driver or not is how you're driving. So real-time and near real-time telematics is a great tool, but it's also a great financial crime prevention tool. So we have some recent patents, and I have a patent on a piece of technology that takes a look at the use of telematics for fraud prevention. Chances are when you're driving, you're not online. So we can create blackout periods essentially while you're driving that you're probably not on monkeying around with your bank account. And I know where your car is and what the IP addresses are where your car is and where that login's coming from. And it's another tool we can use to look for anomalies. But I think identity and access management is probably something that will continue to see evolution in the next few years.
That's brilliant. And, you read some of these horror stories about some of these remote worker applications where, yes, as you say, they turn the camera on every 10 seconds to make sure you didn't happen to, to have the audacity to step away from your desk for a cup of coffee or something. Just knows that would be terrible.
I think there's a real gap in the marketplace there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Keith. Thank you. I'm fascinated by the telematics idea as well. We've seen some really interesting firms in Belfast who are doing things from the telematics side of the world, and linking that up with the world of insurance and financial crime is fascinating. I think it's a very interesting area to keep on looking at. So brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, you've passed your crystal ball test, Keith. Thank you very much. We'll come back in a few years' time and see if you were right.
All right.
And Paddy, if I could move on to you, from your perspective, what are some of the risks, some of the cybersecurity risks that Vesta sees on the horizon that you think will impact your and other businesses?
Well, I suppose at the moment you could really say we're really going through a complete kind of transformation of the e-commerce world at the moment. So things like open banking, so open banking products which let third parties access customer financial data to offer a range of financial products and services is kind of ramping up significantly. There's a lot of talk about it previously, but we are seeing 2 million plus users of it. 50% growth in the last 6 months, so they're adding about 160,000 users per month at the moment, and that's a new product and service which which will probably get rolled out, and some interesting services like payment initiation services and account initiation services, which can help in verifying customers. But you also said, we talked previously about secure customer authentication. It's being mandated with PSD2, comes into effect at the end of the year in the EU. And these two things together, I suppose if I look at it with my Vesta hat on, I think they're going to create a period of customer confusion. So we talked about one-time passwords. You get through SMS, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, and more app-based biometric authentication methods. And a combination of all these, I think fraudsters are probably going to be in a position to exploit the uncertainty or lack of customer information to fool users into submitting kind of valuable data to them. Really spoofing and things like that. And the other thing is, with COVID again, online, there's a surge in online payments, the growth of smartphones, fintechs, neobanks, more and more of our lives are kind of spent online these days, which means that the value of these kind of digital accounts increases. And with the value, that means that the prize for taking over those accounts and social engineering attacks is greater. So I expect to see probably a lot of explosion in methods of techniques of stealing account credentials, through account takeover attacks and social engineering attacks in the way forward. That's what my Vesta had on anyway.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Paddy. And just to kind of reflect on that a little as well, I think that you mentioned open banking there. I know that the FCA last year put out a call for input regarding open finance, and open finance, which is of the call for interest was kind of particularly applicable to banks, consumers, consumer credit firms, insurers, and insurance intermediaries. Financial advisors, fintech firms, and it's about that it extends the open banking really. So again we've reached this point where the organizations can now reach into our bank accounts, and now we're taking that next step. So I think that's absolutely fascinating to kind of bring with it as well. So that's great. Thank you so much, Paddy. And again, we will be back and to check on your prophecies, and we'll see how we get on in a couple of years. That's great.
Look forward to my 3 gold stars.
Brilliant stuff. Donal, I'm going to finish off with you, if I may. From your point of view, you're working with lots and lots of different firms, and you get to see some of these attacks as and when they're coming through. So, from your perspective, what do you see happening in the future? What's in your horizon scanning?
Yeah, I think what I see happening is that the larger firms are getting better and better at dealing with security, and what will become a problem is that the mid-sized and smaller firms will be at greater risk of the sorts of attacks that we're talking about, and the threat actors will focus on them. And it's interesting to hear Paddy talking about how open banking may create what you would say is a greater attack surface for attackers to exploit more confusion around users and customers, and that's not good. So a big underlying theme in cybersecurity discussion at the moment is skills and staffing, and having skilled people in your organization to deal with this type of thing. At the basis, cybersecurity is supposed to be an enabling technology for all industries, for all companies. And so the model by which small to mid-sized companies deal with security may have to change. There may have to be more outsourcing of security to centralized organizations. Not all organizations will be able to afford to run a security operations center to deal with this type of thing. So there will be some evolution in that, probably more organizations using security operations center models just for efficiency purposes. But globally, by I think 2022, there are supposed to be almost 2 million vacancies in cybersecurity. So if your organization buys a tool to look after security, you're probably going to, in many cases, have to hire someone to run that tool, and they may need to be quite skilled. In often cases, they can command quite a high salary, and they may prefer to work for a bigger company. So these are trends that will just have to be worked out, and government and regulation have a part to play to help smaller firms deal with these types of things, because they may be the weakest link in some of the transaction and the financial supply chains that we're talking about. So I think that's something I would be cognizant of and think about quite a lot.
Absolutely, and I think again, just to kind of follow up on that, the supply chain attacks are ones that are hugely successful, if we can use that term in a negative way, but they are ones that are hugely successful because they go for the gosh, I'm going to use a management term. They go for the lowest hanging fruit, but they look for the weakest link in the chain and they attack it, and that's a really interesting way to go. I'm a mentor for a firm who are doing some really interesting stuff around adversarial artificial intelligence. And it's absolutely fascinating to hear what they're up to. But we were talking about recruitment earlier on, and as Donal says, they are looking to recruit at the moment, and it is very tough to find the right people, and especially in smaller firms, and especially in the people, the organisations who maybe don't have the bucks to throw at the people, so I think that's an area definitely where we would like to assist as a NI Cyber cluster, I know that there are lots of firms out there who are helping to do that as well. So it remains for me, firstly, to say thank you to Paddy. Thank you very much for joining us today, Paddy. That was absolutely brilliant. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Keith for coming along and sharing his fantastic insights. It's great to have you on board, Keith. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much to Donal as well. Thank you, Donal, and for coming along and sharing your points of view and your thoughts about how the future is going to look as well. And I suppose finally, thank you to Hilary for pulling this all together, for getting everybody sorted out, making sure that we all had everything in the right at the right time in the right places. Hilary, I'm going to leave it to you, if that's okay, to tell people where they can get, where if there are any questions, where they can email, where they can get to, and apart from that, thank you very much for coming along today, and I look forward to speaking to all of you, those on the screen and not on the screen, again very soon.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you, everyone.
You're on mute, Hilary.
Thanks, Simon. Big thank you to Simon for his moderating skills today. It was I have to say, a really informative session, and certainly has given me a lot to think about, and I hope everyone else. I'm certainly guilty of the terrible passwords, so that's something I'll be changing instantly. I also think there's so many areas came up there actually that I know we've talked about. We have a second cybersecurity session coming on, and that's going to take place in January, which we'll pop the details on our website near the time. But I think really interesting topics from today's that we can delve into a little bit more will certainly be discussed there. So again, huge thank you to Simon Whittaker. And I'd like to thank our brand ambassadors, Paddy at Vesta. Thank you so much for joining our panel. Keith and Donal, big thanks to you. It really has been a great session. So I'd also like to say a big thank you to Gillian and all the guys at NI Cyber who we were lucky enough and to co-host and co-brand this session with today. So thank you so much for that. If you would like to connect with the Fintech Corridor or our members, just simply join us at the Fintech Corridor. So it's www.thefintechcorridor.com. You can always connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter also. And you don't have to be from the region. That's really importantly that you to connect with us, our brand ambassadors. So just one final thanks again to Keith, Paddy, Donal and Simon, Gillian, the NI Cyber guys, and from all of us at the Fintech Corridor. I hope you enjoyed the session and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.